what we need to do now is a practical, what I'll call a practical, where I'm going now to direct certain questions to you, and one amongst you needs to get up and give an answer, right? I will then help you with your answer, okay? So right now, I want one male to get up now and stand in front of the microphone. So the question is going to come to you. Okay, go ahead, stand in front of the microphone. And one female to take the microphone. So you can't switch it. The question comes, you have to answer it. All right? First question. Has the sister got the microphone? Okay, understand that this is, as I said, this is a practical. I'm going to throw a question to you, which is commonly thrown to Muslims. And for you just to try to answer it from the material that we have taken so far. It's all from the general issues, that material, right? So this is just testing to what degree you have absorbed it and, how you would handle it. Is that clear? Okay. First question. A common question by non-Muslims is, why does Islam legalize polygamy? What is your explanation for this? Yeah. Short.
First I'll say that the Quran is the only book in the religious scripture in the world which say that marry only one. All the other world scriptures, nowhere does they say that you should marry only one.
Okay.
Then polygamy was practiced in various societies, in various civilizations prior. Even in the scriptures, later it was like in the Indian Act. The Hindu scriptures did not prohibit polygamy, but the Indian Act, they restricted it. And again we find that the women population across all over the world is more than the male population. In India, however, the women
okay, just give the main point.
Yeah.
And what else?
And then we can give this thing, ill effects of women. I mean, in USA, there are more women than men. So in that situation, if the market gets saturated, the woman would not get any husband.
Well, you mentioned already there was a surplus of women, so that's sort of repetition.
Right.
There's another point which is important.
The nature of man, like a man.
Ratio? No, he mentioned the ratio. Something which is important.
The nature of man, like
nature
of
man. Okay,
man
you said all over the world.
Yeah.
It's practiced all over the world.
It reduces the ill effects by polygamy. If you, like, a man can fulfill his desires by marrying second or third wife. Instead of that, there's a lot of rape and etc. in the society. Is that the other point?
No.
They don't want to take the responsibility. They just want to take the easy way out.
No. Remember, the question is, why does Islam legalize polygamy? Now, I gave you a lot of information. You don't want to just throw out information back at them. You want this information that is directed and focused at the question. Why does Islam legalize polygamy? Okay, as brother is saying, I mean, this was mentioned by the brother already, sort of, that Islam was not the first to legalize polygamy. Polygamy was already in practice. What Islam did instead was?
Legalized. No, permission.
It restricted.
Oh.
Polygamy was already practiced around the world. Islam did not legalize polygamy. It restricted polygamy. You brought the example of, it's the only one that says one. But, I mean, that is not really addressing the point here. Why does Islam legalize polygamy? So we say to that question, we try to make our answers directed to the question itself. I gave you a whole list of information. That's not for the same question. These are for different aspects of that question. If somebody asks further this, then you go into that. If you ask further that, so you should always try to keep your question, your answers, responses, direct to the point of the question. Why did Islam legalize polygamy? We say Islam did not legalize polygamy first and foremost. This was already in practice around the whole world. Islam really limited polygamy. So that's the main point. We clarify that misunderstanding. Misunderstanding with them is what? That polygamy was prohibited everywhere in the world and Islam said it's now legal. But this is not the truth. So that is really our focused answer. If they want to go further, then you deal with further issues. Okay? Okay, next person from the women's side. Question? Somebody got the mic?
Yeah.
Huh? Ready to answer? Some people may say, I believe that no one can love two persons equally. So why marry another one? How are you going to answer this? I read it again. I believe that no one can love two persons equally. So why marry another one? How are you going to answer this?
Emotions are not in anybody's control, but they can give equal treatment to both of them.
Okay, emotions are not in people's control, but we can give equal treatment to both of them. All right, but they would say, but since you can't love both, right? We're not talking about equal treatment here. Since you can't love both, then why take on two? Just being equal in your treatment, that doesn't substitute for not loving them equally. What would you say to that? Sister?
Because it legalizes the relationship with the second woman.
No, why should we marry?
Okay. You could say, better to have a second wife rather than commit adultery, and you don't love them equally, but you are fair to both of them. You could say from that perspective, that's still a better circumstance, right? But the other point that we can raise is that you have two children. Do you love them equally? You have two brothers. Do you love them equally? You have your mother and father. Do you love them equally? So, the reality is you don't love any of these people equally, but you love them. Right? So, the requirement on us is not necessarily to love equally, but that we love and are fair. Fairness is what is required. Okay? A male, come up and take the microphone. You're smiling, come. If someone asked, how come Muslim men can divorce their wives so easily? They only have to say, I divorce you 3 times. Isn't that unfair and unjust to married women? How would you correct this misunderstanding?
Is it not very easy to divorce in Islam? But it is a general misconception that if I say I divorce 3 times, that is divorce. But there are some procedures in which, suppose the woman has to stay in the husband's house when he declared divorce till 2 menstrual period.
Okay, the main point that you want to say here is that it is not simply to say I divorced 3 times that they're divorced. So then you'll have to bring the points that I mentioned before to clarify that there are procedures. You said there are procedures, it's not so simple. Okay. The other point that we should also mention with regards to the ease of divorce. What is the other point?
Ease of marriage.
Huh?
Ease of marriage.
The ease of marriage. That marriage is relatively simple. A person says, I do. So why should ending that contract be, saying I don't, why should it be made unnecessarily complicated? Right? Okay, have a seat. To the women's side, there's the microphone to somebody else now. To anybody. Just take the microphone. Don't be shy. This is just for your own practice. Just you have it in your hand. Don't pass it back. Just answer it.
It's not a momentarily decision. There's a lot of factors that need to be met before such an
Yeah, actually, I'm not asking the question anymore. I'm giving you a different question. Okay, you have it? Ready? How would you reply to a non-Muslim who asked, why do men in Islam get more inheritance than women?
Somebody else.
The person with the microphone, please answer it. No, you're passing the microphone around. You see, I wanted the person who had the microphone to try to answer it.
Because men have more legal obligations, like they have to look after the family and his dependents, and a girl simply, she's just dependent on somebody else.
Okay, rather than put it that way, put it that there is a male who is responsible to look after her. Right. That's good. Okay. If a non-Muslim claimed that the status of women in Islam is inferior to that of men because their testimony isn't equal to that of a man, what would your response be?
Actually, I can't able to understand. Testimony what?
No. If a non-Muslim claimed that the status of women in Islam is inferior to that of men because their testimony, their witness, right, isn't equal to that of a man, what would your response be?
I'm very nervous.
You're nervous? Okay. Next. Go ahead. Tip for Dawa, you have to get over your nervousness.
Okay. The question again, please.
If a non-Muslim claimed that the status of women in Islam is inferior to that of men because their testimony isn't equal to that of a man, what would your response be?
This is not in all the situations. This is just for specific situations where men are deemed to have more expertise than women. For example, as in business, where the norm is that males have more expertise and females do not have that kind of expertise. In that case, a female witnesses, you require 2 female witnesses. But in other situations, like for example, the example you gave of breastfeeding, 1 female witness is enough.
Okay, good answer. Now, back follow-up question. If they said to you after that, but women today have business expertise, so why can't we then accept 1 witness?
Okay, today's society, what society is following today is not the normal attitude. This is a majority only in cities, in major cities, but even if you see in developed countries like England or America for that matter, you see in the countryside that people still follow what Allah has prescribed for us. And that is a normal thing. Today women working in these situations, and I would quote the example you gave, wherein people like, the World War I example and World War II example and all that, how this situation has become abnormal, that leads business women.
Okay,
business women.
So the main point is that you stress to them that this is an abnormal situation. It's not the norm. And it is only limited to certain parts of the world. The majority of the world still follow the normal pattern of women looking after the home, men outside doing business. That's the norm. Okay, to the sisters, somebody pass the microphone on to somebody else now. Who has the microphone, please? Okay, you have the microphone. A Christian may argue that there are plenty of okay, this is not covered already. Non-Muslims often ask, why do Muslim women have to cover their heads? What would you say to this?
I would say that how in Hinduism, I would say that it is the modesty of the women in Islam to cover themselves.
The modesty of women in Islam. Okay, and their question was, why do Muslim women have to cover their heads?
Because
that was what your main answer here, where you have to start from, is because God commanded it, right? Okay. This is why we have to cover, because God has commanded us to do so. But He explained why we have to do so. And that's when you bring your 2 points, because they'll ask you then why. So why do you have to do so? You've opened up for them to ask you the other question. Why do you have to do so? Could you give the main 2 points, please? Go ahead, the same one with the mic. Could you answer the main 2 points?
For the thing that you'll be, it's like a shield for the women to be covered.
Shield from what?
Shield from the other men.
Yeah, that's kind of vague, you know.
Like, it'll protect you from being molested and unwanted remarks.
Okay, unwanted advances,
yeah,
you could say. Unwanted advances from men, okay.
And you will have your own identity of being a Muslim. You'll be respected for how you are, because you're following what has been told.
Well, although we said that, what was the second purpose of the dress? Somebody else answer, please. Pass it on. Second purpose of the dress?
It is to show the men that you are off limits. That is, we are different. You cannot approach us.
Okay, so the dress then becomes, as we said, a fashion statement. It is a statement about who we are and what we stand for. Right? So let the society know that we are modest, chaste women who are not interested in such things. Okay. To the men who will stand up. If I pick you out and your English is weak and you have difficulty, then just tell me, I'll choose somebody else. You're okay? A common question asked by non-Muslim women is, how come Muslim women cannot display their beauty when God made them beautiful to attract men? Why did God make them beautiful? To attract men. So how come the women are not able to display their beauty? It's a similar question, but from another direction.
Sorry, sir, I can't.
Huh?
I can't give answer.
You can't answer?
Yes.
Why not? Okay, somebody else. Go ahead.
She can in fact display her beauty to her husband, to her close family, and within her female sisters.
Okay, it's good. Stay there. The good point that they are making a generalization that she can't display her beauty to men. So he said, no, she can display her beauty to men, but it is to a restricted group of men. So their next question would be, why only those men?
Because to prevent yourself from the various other consequences, like not wearing hijab and all, being molested or being evoking illicit feelings of other men.
Yeah, okay. The point is that when you attract men, you're also attracting their advances. And you don't want those advances, right? You don't want the consequence of those advances, so that's why you're limited to the group who can appreciate your beauty without harm coming along with it. Good.
Thank you.
To the women, you have another point?
If so, then she would become a woman of mass distraction.
A woman of mass destruction, okay. All right.
I would like to add a point here, if you allow me to.
Please.
I would explain to that person about a rose or any flower which has attractive petals, and it is there to attract the bee.
Okay.
And if it has the scent and the flower and the color, It has to allow the bee to sit on it.
All right.
Otherwise, it's not supposed to have the scent and the color and the attractiveness.
All right. So, I mean, the point you're trying to say here is that once you attract, you should be ready for the consequence.
Yes.
Right. Good point. Good point. Okay, on to another sister who hasn't answered.
Yes.
Huh? Okay, some people say that we are now in the modern world and people don't need to dress like that anymore. How would you respond to this observation? Who's got the microphone, please? Answer.
No. Repeat the question.
Could you repeat the question, sir?
Some people say that we're now in the modern world. We're still talking about the dress, huh? But some people may come up with this. Some people say we're now in the modern world and people don't need to dress like that anymore.
Yeah, in the earlier ages, people were not dressed up like what the people are wearing in Western countries now. So when they were dressed up very well, when they were covering their whole body, like they were, they were not harassed. But now after dressing up, they reduced their dress size, they are being molested or harassed by others. So can we say that?
Well,
the crime rate has gone high now.
Yeah, but this is not addressing their question. Their question is, we are now in the modern world and people don't need to dress like that anymore. They look at it as, okay, in old times, ancient times, people used to need to dress like that, but now we don't need to. So what is the point that we really want to get to here?
Whether it is old times or new times, the modesty of the woman is still at stake. Well, she will get raped and molested in the olden times if she exposes herself, and even now it is actually on the increase because of the reduction of the size of her dresses. So whether it is an old era or a new era, modesty is what is at stake.
Right. The basic point is that human nature hasn't changed. Human nature hasn't changed. Ancient times, modern times, it's the same human nature. And this is why Allah, God, prescribed for women to cover themselves from ancient times, and that law will remain until the last day on the face of this earth. Okay, this is a common question that people raise with regards to Islamic teachings, Islamic law, etc. You want to go back to 1,400 years ago? You want to apply laws that were discovered or was revealed at that time? We're now, in the 21st century. We need something that matches the 21st century human being. But we say it's the same human being. The same human being. The desires of human beings, the jealousies, the loves, the various emotions of human beings have not changed. Only the technology that we have and the development of our materials allow us to express it in different ways, but it's still the same desires. An animal lover might claim that the Muslim method of slaughtering animals is inhumane. How would you reply to this?
Well, I would say that yes, it might look initially that the way the Muslims slaughter or the Zabiha system, it looks ruthless. But if we analyze, the way we slaughter, initially we cut the veins or the blood veins, jugular veins or the blood veins. Now, latest research tells us that pain is not caused due to this. But why is the animal withering? That is due to the gushing of blood out of the body. But basically there is no pain for the animal. So when there is no pain, there is the question of killing the animal in a ruthless manner doesn't arise at all. You know, if it is for Christians, if we are discussing, then they also have meat as we have. You know. But their system of slaughtering animal is much more ruthless than we do. As you were telling, all the animals are hanged on this thing, and they are put in the water, and the water is electrocuted. You know, that is a more ruthless manner of killing an animal.
Okay, so our main point is, first, when they said it's inhumane, you pointed out what does inhumane really mean? That we're doing it in a harsh and painful manner. You clarify that you said modern research. Actually, you could even give a simple example of a razor blade. You know, a razor blade is very sharp. You handling a razor blade can cut yourself and not even realize you've been cut, isn't it? Any of you have handled a razor blade, you can cut yourself, you don't realize until you see the blood coming. So and that is when you explain to them, when we cut the neck of the animal, we use an extremely sharp knife. We have to sharpen it like a razor. So when we cut the animal doesn't feel it. So that's the point. Modern research, I mean, if you can remember, okay, it's in Germany, but it's a bit complicated. You know, in big talks you use that. In smaller talks, you just give the example of a razor blade, right? And then you give the other side, which is that their methods, the so-called humane methods of slaughter, which involves inflicting great amounts of pain on the animals, whether by electrocution or by clubbing. Okay, good point. If a non-Muslim asks, what does halal meat mean, what would be your response?
Halal would mean that meat which is slaughtered within the bounds of the Islamic Sharia, and also the meat from the sea, which is halal in and of itself. Saying Bismillah, that is within the bounds of the Sharia, means saying Bismillah before you slaughter it. That is Bismillah, saying in the name of Allah in a more in the manner in which they will understand. That is saying in the name of Allah would make that meat halal.
Yeah, remember now, you're talking, this is a tester, you're talking to a non-Muslim, right? You're talking to a non-Muslim. You want them to understand what you're trying to say. So now you have to remove any of our technical terms that we use. Okay, so try to explain it again. Remember, it's a non-Muslim you're talking to. What does halal meat mean?
Halal meat means so halal meat means that meat which is slaughtered beginning in the name of God.
Okay, so if a Hindu took an animal and said in the name of God and slaughtered it, can you eat it? Can you?
No.
Okay, so then you just contradicted yourself. So what is our definition? How are we going to explain what is halal meat?
With the proper procedure, that is using all the what do you say? The rules that are prescribed, that the knife has to be extremely sharp, and that you cut only the jugular vein and the esophagus without actually cutting through the spinal cord, and you try to give the animal as little pain as you can.
Okay, can somebody else try to give an explanation? Okay, go ahead. Non-Muslim asks you, what does halal meat mean?
Our God has permitted us to eat some meat and forbidden some other meat not to eat. And moreover, the meat has to be slaughtered in a manner which prescribed by our God. This is halal meat.
Okay. As he said, because halal means permissible, what is permissible to eat. So it may not involve slaughter, right? Because there's some animals which are like the pig, the dog, and certain birds and other animals which we can't eat, which are not halal. So halal doesn't necessarily include slaughter. We have to give, when we give, we're talking about now explaining Islam to others in as precise terms as we can without mixing in our own terminology. Because when we're speaking, we have to be careful that we don't speak as if we're speaking to a Muslim. So as he said, it is meat which God has made permissible for Muslims to eat. We say it is some animals there's some animals which we cannot eat, period, under any circumstance, unless our life is threatened. We may eat it to live, to survive. Otherwise, the group of animals that we can eat, we are allowed to eat them if they are slaughtered in a particular way which has been prescribed by God. That's it. You don't need to go into all of the detail. It has to be a sharp knife, etc. If they ask you further, then how is the Muslim way of slaughtering? Then you're going to say, well, we use this sharp knife and so on, so on, so on, so. Yeah, that's good. Okay, question to the men who will get up and answer here now. Somebody, just don't be shy. If a non-Muslim accused Muslims of spreading their religion by killing people who didn't accept their religion, how would you respond to that?
Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. I just start with the quoting of the ayah which says there is no force in conversion like Rafiddin. And then I could say some historical facts that in Indonesia, none of the army has gone into it, and in the eastern coast and the western coast of Africa too. So if it have been if what he says is correct, then the Spain would have been totally Islamic, and most of them, because we ruled it for more than 700 years. And if he's an Indian, I can easily quote the India as such. The historical factors, we ruled for more than around 900 years, and only 20% of the share we got during independence. So,
okay, that's good. We give that's good. You give practical examples from history where Muslims ruled areas and people did not all convert to Islam. And he mentioned also that actually the Quran prohibits forcing anyone into the religion. So at that time you can admit that if it did happen anywhere, because maybe he will pull out of some, historical record something and say, well, what about this? So you cover yourself right from the beginning. If it did happen anywhere, then it was a mistake. This was a rare and abnormal circumstance. It was a mistake because Islam does not permit this. The Quran says there is no compulsion in religion. It's good. Okay, to the sisters. Somebody has the microphone? See, you shouldn't be shy about taking the microphone and trying to answer, because, when the situation of Dawa comes, you're not going to have a chance to pass the microphone on to anybody. Somebody asks you a question, then you just have to deal with that question. You guys are looking around for somebody else to give the microphone to, So just take it and try. If you can't, then you pass it to somebody else. Okay? Question. You ready? A person may say that there is no compulsion in religion, but Muslim parents force their children to accept Islam. How would you answer this accusation? You understand it? Right? Some people say, there's no compulsion in religion, right? So therefore we let our children choose whatever religion they want. You'll find this common now, Westerners, this is their and sort of modern idea, you choose whatever you'd like to be. But you Muslims, you force your children to accept Islam.
It is true that Islam doesn't allow forcing religion, but if at all parents do it, I guess it's out of love, so that because the children are their amana and they want to make sure that their children turn out to be righteous people. But it is
okay,
not.
You use the term amana. Do you think a non-Muslim will understand that?
It's their responsibility to make sure they raise righteous people.
Okay.
But I don't think it's allowed for them to force them too much once they're big enough to make their own decisions.
Is that true? Is it, if a Muslim has the means to force their children to remain Muslims, should they allow them to choose another religion? Or should they force them to be Muslims? As long as they're able. We should, as long as we're able, we should force them. We're in a position of authority, we should enforce that law. Why? Because Islam we believe to be the truth. So when people take a liberal attitude towards religion, that really it doesn't matter what religion you follow, they can say to their children, choose what you want, because that's they're coming from a different background, a different perspective. They're oftentimes in doubt about their own religion, okay? Whereas from the Muslim perspective, we believe that Islam is the truth. So to say we are going to just give our children free rein to do falsehood, to do things which are harmful, which will destroy them, no. The parent, in the same way we will stop the children in their play, in their activities. We don't just tell them you can play with anything. Okay, there's a razor blade, you can play with it. You can play with a knife. You can no. We will restrict them and we will stop them from playing with certain things that we know to be harmful and are destructive, right? So our attitude in terms of raising the children is that, yes, we will try to, of course, let them understand. They will naturally try to do what we do growing up with us, and we will encourage them and try to keep them within the fold as long as we can. Of course, once they're beyond our control, they become adults. If they choose otherwise, then that's something beyond our control. But as long as it's within our control, we will try to put pressure on them to remain Muslims, because we believe it is the truth and we want to try to save them from destruction. That we just have to be honest about. And we try to give some kind of example, as I gave you with children playing with knives and things like this. We do try to restrict our children in other areas, right? Because you can see from those areas physical harm, where we see spiritual harm as being even greater and more important than physical harm. So that is our perspective. In that type of question, all you can do is to give them the Islamic perspective. If they can at least recognize you have some logical reason for it and that you're not just a fanatic, right? Because that's the idea you want to clarify to them, that hey, there's a reason behind what I'm doing. It's not just a fanatical kind of a thing, right?
Does it apply or even to the wife, the authority of the husband over the wife? If the wife wants to become a murtad?
Of course, the husband, with regards to the wife, if he sees his wife going astray, he should, with whatever means he has, force her to try to keep her within the fold of Islam. Because if she becomes murtad, as you mentioned, she apostates, right? Then his marriage to her is annulled. Just as if a woman, her husband becomes murtad, he leaves Islam, her marriage to him becomes annulled. It's not permissible for a man a male Muslim or a female Muslim to be married to one who has apostated.
In the case of a Christian, the woman actually agreed to become a Muslim and married the man, but now she has become a Christian. She went back to Christianity, but she is still the wife of the man. But is it okay in that case?
No, if she was a Muslim.
No, she was a Christian.
Yeah, she became a Muslim.
She just fooled him.
Well,
for the sake of marriage.
Well, I mean that if she only pretended to become a Muslim, she said what is required. I don't know. The question you'd even have to ask yourself is: did she really fool him, or was he satisfied with her saying just for the sake of marriage? You know, because you have this case, and I've seen many cases of it.
No, she wears a burqa. She wears a abaya. She prays. But when she came up to my classes, Islamic classes, when I questioned her, I found out that she has faith in Christianity yet. She believes that Jesus is the Savior. She prays, she wears an abaya. Her name is an Islamic name. And the husband doesn't know this.
He doesn't know this. Well, of course, then you should inform the husband. He should know it. I mean, before, I would say, try to help her first. You know, try to sit her down and to clarify these things and let her reach the truth. But if she refuses in the end, after you've made your attempts, then you must inform the husband. You know, if it matters to him. Right? If it matters to him. And then you have to clarify, was this ever made clear to her? You know, did she really understand? Because maybe people only focused on La ilaha illallah, you know, that there's no God worthy of worship but Allah. Okay, so you worship Allah. And Muhammad ﷺ was a messenger of Allah. But they didn't go into, who was Jesus? Because usually myself, when somebody comes from a Christian background, they say, I want to accept Islam. That's the first thing I ask them. You know, who is Jesus in Islam? Because that is their area of confusion. So you need to get that clear. And sometimes people ignore that and just focus on the other part of La ilaha illallah, right? Muhammad Rasulullah, which could be accepted, and the person still has in the back of their mind that Jesus is the Savior. So we have to look back to see where the mistake was. Maybe it was that they didn't explain to her properly, right, from the very beginning. So she accepted based on what they presented to her. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulil Kareem. Wa ala ali wa ashabi. Wa man istanna bi sunnatihi ila yawmiddin. All praise is due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessings be on the last Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and on all those who follow the path of righteousness until the last day. We finished off in the previous session the practical for general issues. Now we will be looking at certain specific targets of Dawa and what is necessary for us to know about their belief systems, their arguments, their lines of reasoning, etc. So we'll now begin to look at atheists, deists, and agnostics as one group. Then we'll look at Christians, and then we'll look at Hindus in terms of Dawa and how Dawa should be directed towards them. The first group that we are going to look at are the atheists. An atheist technically is one who disbelieves in God. He believes that there is no God in existence. A deist is one who believes that God exists, created the world, but thereafter assumed no control over the lives of the people. He created the world and let it run by itself. He didn't communicate to human beings. And the third group, the agnostics, are those really who don't know, or one who thinks it is impossible to know whether there is a God, a future life, or anything beyond the material phenomena. He says, I don't have enough evidence to say there is no God, nor do I have enough evidence to say there is a God. And Sir Aldous Huxley is the first one in 1869 to coin this term agnostic. So if we start with the worst case scenario, that is the individual who does not believe there is a God. His approach basically is to address believers as fanatics, people who believe in God based on blind faith. Blind faith. Not logic and reason, but blind faith. Whereas his or her disbelief, atheism, is based on reason, logic. That's how they usually present it. However, in dealing with atheists, we need to establish the point to them that belief in God is in fact logical and reasonable, and that it is the disbelief in God which is illogical and unreasonable and based on blind faith. We turn the tables around. How? First and foremost, we can point out to them that if belief in God was illogical, then the founders of logic, who are the people who are referred to as the founders of logic? Huh? In ancient times, the Greeks. The laws of logic were written down by the Greeks. It's not to say that they really invented logic. Maybe there are people before who knew it, who used it, etc. But they wrote it down. They wrote it down as a system, like a mathematical system. Logic. A equals B. If A equals B and B equals C, therefore A must equal C. And so on and so forth, right? They had a whole system that they worked out. The Greeks. They were known for their logic. Inventors of logic. So, how is it then that Plato and Aristotle, the leading thinkers amongst the Greeks, concluded, using logic and reason, that there must be a God? Right? Plato and Aristotle both held the position that there must be a God. So if it was so logical and reasonable not to believe in God, then how did they get there? Right? So we're saying then that, in fact, logic and reason should take you to the belief in God. And let me stress that wherever people go in the world, whatever generation we look at, civilization, backwards or modern, all of the vast majority of people believe in God. The vast majority of people believe in God. So we could say, in our terminology, by ijma', by ijma', the consensus of human beings in this world, they believe in God. Those who don't believe in God have always been a very small minority. Always been a very small minority. And in fact, the believers, the people who hold that there is a God, being the majority, indicate by their majority that the belief in God is something natural. It is something natural. Because the natural things that we do are things that you find people doing everywhere. The learned things, things that we learn by nurture, we will find them in some places and not in others. This is an argument that anthropologists, sociologists have, the argument between nature and nurture. They say, what is natural? What are you born with? And what are the things that you learn? You're born with a desire to eat, but you learn the types of food to eat, how to eat, with knife and fork or whatever, or spoon, or these are the things you learn. But you don't have to learn to eat, right? You don't have to learn to want to eat. This is something we're naturally born with, nature, right? So they have classified many of the things that we do in these two categories, nature and nurture. Belief in God, traditionally anthropologists classify that as nurture. We believe in God because the society we're born in believes in God, and it's something inherited. We're taught this. It's not something natural. However, some British scientists, looking at the ijma' of human societies, studying societies of the past and the present, ancient, modern, primitive, all over the world, they found people having this belief in God. They posited some years back that perhaps belief in God was natural. Of course, when they made this suggestion, they were laughed out of the scientific conferences that they made the proposal in. The scientists scoffed at it. This was nonsense. Who would dare to say this? After so many years of believing that it was by nurture, Freud and Durkheim and other psychiatrists and sociologists had already explained where the belief in God came from certain human complexes and all this kind of stuff. How could somebody come around now and say it's natural? Well, they argued, but it's everywhere. And this is the sign of it being natural. Anyway, what happened following that was in 1997, scientists at the University of California, neuroscientists, studying the brains of people who had abnormalities in their brain activity, people who had seizures and strokes and these kind of things. They were studying the brains of different people, living people, probing, testing, recording data, etc. At the University of California at San Diego, they discovered that there was a portion in the brain, in the frontal lobe, which whenever this was stimulated, or whenever people had religious experiences, it was stimulated. It seemed that it was the focal point of religious belief. Meaning that if they had a seizure and the seizure affected this part of their brain, they would feel this overwhelming consciousness of God and feeling about God and things like this. Right? And when they ask people in experiments to, pray and to go into religious fervor and that, they found that that is the part of the brain that became active. So from that they concluded that there was a God spot in the brain. That the human brain was hot-wired, that's how they put it, hot-wired for the belief in God. This article is in your notes. This is scientific fact. This is not hearsay stories which is passed around the internet. This is scientific fact. So what you find there is that this supports the Islamic contention that human beings are born with a natural belief in God. And this is found in Surah Al-A'raf, verses 172 and 173, where Allah said there, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى شَهِدْنَا. When your Lord drew forth from the loins of the children of Adam their descendants and made them testify concerning themselves, saying, Am I not your Lord? They all said, Yes, we testify to it. That every human being who would come on the face of this earth, already in the spiritual form, testified to God's existence. And that is why Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, Kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitra. Every child is born with a natural belief in Allah. Right? So, the argument that belief in God is natural is supported by scientific evidence, and we have it supported also from our perspective by revelation. But coming back to the logical arguments for the belief in God. Plato, in arguing for the belief in God, used the basic argument of the Quran. That is, design indicates the designer. That is the basic argument, the most common argument used in the Quran. Design indicates the designer. That wherever you find design, there has to be a designer behind it. That is the norm. That is where our minds go. When we're walking on the beach and we see a footprint in the sand, we do not stop to reflect on how amazing it is that the tide came in and the water sunk into the sand and made a footprint. We automatically assume that somebody walked there before us. That is natural. Design indicates a designer. The ancient Arabs used to refer to it saying that al-ba'la tadullu ala al-ba'ir, that the dung of the camel indicates the camel. When the Bedouin was riding on the desert and he came across some camel dung, he didn't stop to think about how amazing it was that the wind blew the sand into these forms and rain fell on it and mixed up with some straw or some leaves, whatever, and you ended up with something looking like camel's dung. No. He automatically assumed that somebody rode by there on a camel and the camel dropped its dung there. That is the obvious. The obvious, right? Design indicates the designer. So, that led Plato to conclude that since there is design in everything we see in this world, and truly, no matter where we look, out in space, inside the atom, in nature around us, water, snow, sand, wherever we look, we just find designs everywhere. Design. So this implies that there must be a master designer who designed everything. And that's what led Plato to conclude that there has to be a God. Allah said in the Quran, أَفَلَا يَنظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Will you not look at the camel and how it is created? The camel is specially created in such a way that it will survive on the desert. It saves water in its hump. It has organs in its nostrils. The way its feet are designed to minimize the loss of moisture from its body, so it can last for days on the desert. This is special creation. Special creation. So this is, Allah calls us to reflect on the design of the camel, that there must be a designer for him, you know, and so on and so forth. So the argument from design, as we said, is the most common argument used in the Quran. What is the response of the atheist to the argument from design? What does he say? What does the atheist say? Huh? The design came by itself. Now, they usually say it came by accident. The design came by accident. It was accidental. That if you have enough accidents, that design will happen. Meaning, you know, you take a pail of paint and you throw it against the wall. Sometimes when the paint hits the wall, you might find it looks something like a hand, or it might look something like a head, or a foot, or something. It may have something looking something like something else. By accident. But if you mix that pail of paint, red, blue, yellow, green, and all these different colors, and you threw it against the wall, do you think that you would ever, by accident or by chance, create the Mona Lisa? You know the Mona Lisa? Very famous painting, right? The Mona Lisa, smiling woman. Right? If you mix the paint and you throw it 1 time or 2 times or 3 times or 100 times, do you think you would ever come up with the Mona Lisa? Do you think so? No. Never. It would never happen. The first time you try to do it, the chances of it happening are 0. The same as the last time you try. It's the same. It's not going to happen. The way they like to put it, the atheists, they say if you put 100 monkeys in a cage, I don't know if you heard the monkey example before. You put 100 monkeys in a cage and you give them 100 typewriters and sheets of paper. Let them bang away at the keys with their heads, their noses, sitting on the keys, beating it with their feet and everything. Eventually, if you gave them Arabic typewriters, one of them is going to type out the whole Quran for you. If you give them an unlimited amount of time, eventually, one of them is going to type out the whole Quran. Just banging away at those keys. What are the chances of that? You say 0. Each time the monkey tries, the chances are 0. No way. What happens when you present this to the atheist will say, but mathematicians and scientists, they say that the chance of this happening is 1 to the minus 0.0000, or maybe they put 1,000,000 zeros after it. But they say there still is a chance.